Good afternoon. Hi. We are so happy that you're here. On every table there is a sheet of paper with a place for a name and an email address, and we hope you'll add your name and address to that so that we can stay in touch. We'd like to write you and get your comments and your ideas and your suggestions for where we go next. And if you have a question or a comment today, there are index cards on the table if you want to leave that. I'll pick those up after we're through today, and we'll certainly read them carefully. In 2012, Susan Cain's book, Quiet, with the subtitle, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking, was published. It was read and discussed, and certainly it prompted strong interest here on campus. And now, after many discussions, here we are. Academic advisors, students, faculty encourage student affairs to find ways to open campus discussions about the introvert in the educational setting. After a few conversations with Professor Campbell, he graciously agreed to spend this hour with us and to help us build greater awareness. Professor Campbell is head of the Department of Psychology at the University of Georgia and has been on campus for almost 14 years. He's written and researched extensively in narcissism. Dr. Campbell's keen intellect and his fine sense of humor make him precisely the person to help us start this discussion. The Division of Student Affairs is pleased to support today's exchange with Dr. Campbell.
Thanks. This is interesting. Sylvia's actually, she didn't mention, lives across the street from me and managed to twist my arm one day, maybe twice, about this. But I thought it'd be interesting to look at this issue, one, because I study narcissism, which is really extraversion with the special twist of being kind of a jerk. So it's got that real extraversion piece to it. And two, I'm very introverted. I mean, people don't see that, but I was like, God, yeah, I'm an introvert, and deal with some of these issues, and I never thought of it. I always thought it was kind of a good thing, but then apparently this is an issue people are talking about a lot. So I was just going to try to talk about it. So here we go. One of the things that really strikes me about the world now, and this especially with studying narcissism, is that the world is much more, I'm thinking of the word convivial. I don't even know if that's a word. Is that a word? Does it sound like a word? No? Something like that? Okay, is that a word? Yes! Okay. Formerly keen intellect. The world now really works for extroversion. It pulls for extroversion in a lot of ways. And I just have some advice. I mean, we have more careers now than ever. People say we have 7 careers. I looked into that. That's probably not the case. But we have a lot more careers, and every time you have a new career, you got to go out there and sell yourself and get a job, which pulls for extroversion. We tend to do a lot of work in the service industry, which means talking to people, which also pulls for extroversion. We have more relationships now than we used to. The average age for marriage is 27 women, 29 men, which means we're dating a lot more, which means you got to be more extroverted just to get those dates. Once you're married, you can just lock yourself in a closet, put on sweatpants. But that's not true. Little true. Our education system has changed a lot, and the workplace has changed a lot. So we do a lot more team-based learning. I was at the med school talking to some folks yesterday, and they're using a team-based model there instead of this cutthroat competitive model. It's all team-based. We do this in classes and teams, so a lot of it has to do with extroversion and sociability. And finally, there's this with this broader breakdown of the social contract. I mean, you don't just go work for somebody for 20 years, 30 years. You end up having to market yourself a lot more, and it even gets to the point where we talk about self-branding now. Not only do we have to put ourselves out there in front of an audience, but we have to brand ourselves. Like literally, I've got a logo and a look, and you wear a certain kind of glasses or whatever. See, we do a lot of promotion and culture. Another way I wanted to look at this, who's the most famous people in America? And so I went to Google and just said, who are people searching for the most? Generally, it's not people who are introverts. Maybe it used to be. Nowadays, it's people who are out there in the media and famous. There's a Canadian on this list too. Thank you, Justin. But so there's a lot more pull for extroversion just in terms of fame. I looked at Google. This is the Google Ngram, which I just love. But basically, it shows use of the word introversion and extroversion. I'm trying to get this thing to work. It's not working. That's really strange. But what you find is that introversion has been dropping. These are just in books over the last 70 years. And introversion or extroversion is going up, which I just love that data point. I didn't think it would come out. And also people becoming more extroverted. These are data from Gene Twangy that were collected in 2001 or published in 2001, showing just a general increase and these are college students, but in college student extroversion over the time, which makes sense. If culture is demanding extroversion, we're going to get more extroverted, and that's what we find. So in the face of this, and this is what I learned from Sylvia and looking around after this, was this new interest in introversion. So there's the book Quiet, which is about the power of introversion. There's the introvert advantage. Apparently, there's an advantage to being introverted. I think there are probably some. This is my favorite, introvert power. It's like you're a turtle, but you're a mighty turtle. I don't know. I guess there's the turtle. So there's this really renewed interest, which is almost like a backlash to the culture right now. You've got a fame-based, self-promoting culture, and then there's a backlash, which makes sense. So I'm going to talk about some of these things, but first I wanted to define what we're talking about when we talk about introversion. And this idea goes back, it goes way, way back, but in most of the psychology models we use, at least start with Carl Jung, who is a Swiss psychiatrist who is also very introverted. But he broke the world down into introverts and extroverts. His definition was introversion was somebody who had a contemplative life, somebody who got energy from being alone. So you're by yourself, you get energy, you're in a social situation, your energy gets drained. Extroverts, in contrast, were more of an active life. You get energy from being with people, and you lose energy when you're alone. And that was a big distinction of consciousness. He added two things to this. One is thinking versus feeling. So some people think about things. Some people are more driven by emotions or heart. And then there's the definition, he called those the rational functions. Then there are the irrational functions, which is sensing, which is like building things, or liking reality versus intuition, which is liking ideas and patterns. And you've seen this definition most commonly in scales like the Myers-Briggs. You're taking the Myers-Briggs, you're like, I'm an INTJ. They added a J and a P at the end. If you go into business, you're going to take this, or version. So they have questions on it. These aren't from Myers-Briggs because they're copyrighted, but they're the closest thing I could find on the internet. You spend your leisure time actively socializing. After prolonged socializing, you feel a need to get away and be alone. First is more extroversion, the second more introversion. When we talk about personality now, in the scientific literature, we tend to use what's called the Big Five model. How this came about was somebody had an idea. Well, if we have personality traits and they're important, they're going to be in language. They're going to be encoded in language. And if they're really important, we're going to have one trait for them. So it might be nice or outgoing or sad or energetic. And if we take all these traits and boil them down, see what goes together, we're going to end up with a sort of a master list of traits. When you do that, you get 5 of these, hence the Big Five. So the first of these is neuroticism. They spell ocean or canoe, by the way, so that's how you remember them. But typically, neuroticism comes first. So neuroticism, and this thing right here is the TIPI, or 10-item personality inventory. The colors match. So with neuroticism, sort of high neuroticism would be anxious and easily upset. Low neuroticism, I'm calm, I'm emotionally stable. Woody Allen is sort of a prototype of neurotic, or at least the character he plays. Extraversion, extroverted, enthusiastic would be extroverted. Reserved and quiet would be the introversion end. So extroversion and introversion are one dimension. Openness to experience would be open to new experiences or complexity versus conventional or uncreative, which would be low openness. Agreeableness, this is sort of like niceness. I'm critical or quarrelsome would be low agreeableness. Sympathetic or warm would be high agreeableness. And conscientiousness, which is a very long word, which basically means do what you're supposed to do. So dependable and self-disciplined would be high conscientiousness. Disorganized or careless would be low. So you put those 5 together, it covers a whole lot of terrain and personality. So some of the data I'm going to show you all 5. To get a little more insight into introversion and extroversion, I have a couple scales. One is from the Big 5 inventory and one from the mini IPIP, which is like the mini Big 5. So Big 5 were things like is talkative, that's extroverted, is reserved, introverted, is full of energy, generates lots of enthusiasm. Extroversion tends to be quiet. Introverted has an assertive personality versus is sometimes shy, inhibited, or is outgoing. So that's a very commonly used measure for introversion, extroversion. The mini version is like I am the life of the party, I don't talk a lot, talk to a lot of different people at parties, or keep in the background. That's the short version. Does this all make sense? So, I mean, this is just a way to really give you an idea of what we're measuring when we're measuring introversion. And then I want to give you, sorry, it's like extroversion in a cup. I want to give you the super big picture, because I like to think about big pictures and then think about small pictures. First of all, when we talk about personality, there's a tendency to say this personality is good and this one's bad. When you look at personality psychology, and frankly, when you look at almost everything in psychology, they're trade-offs. They're good parts and bad parts. So extroversion might be good for meeting people. It might be lousy if you have to have an analyst job. I once did a talk at the Central Intelligence Agency, and I sat her on the desk with all these intelligence analysts. I'm like, you're the most introverted group of people I ever met. And the guy goes, yeah, we have a joke at the CIA, how can you tell the extrovert? Because he looks at the numbers in the elevator instead of at his shoes. So if you have a job like a CIA analyst, introversion is really a useful trait. If you're dating, extroversion's better. Most problems happen when personality is extreme and inflexible. And this is what we see with personality disorders. Most personality within the normal range works. What happens is when you're way at the edge and you can't change depending on situations. So being a little bit of a jerk, fine. Some people like that. But if you're always a jerk, and when you get a job interview, you're a jerk, it will mess you up. If you're nice, great. But if you're nice all the time, and when people are taking advantage of you and you're still nice, it's going to mess you up. So the real problems with personality come when they're extreme and when they don't adapt to the context of the situation. The other thing is personality can change. We often think, and this goes back to a lot of psychology, that personality is somehow set in stone or cast in plaster, as William James said. From the Freudian tradition, we think of personality being set by age 6. At 6, there you go. It's like my 6-year-old. She's a fucking maniac. But if by Freudian models, like, there's your personality, you're good to go. Other people think, well, by 18. So all of you are in trouble. This is as good as it gets. But it's not the case. Personality can change. It's plastic. You can become less neurotic by practicing meditation if you don't want to be as neurotic. You can take SSRIs. I mean, there's data on Prozac, or I don't know if it's Prozac or other SSRIs. They actually change your personality, make you less neurotic, and that leads to reduced depression. You can become whatever you want if you change your life. So these things can change. In terms of the big picture with extroversion seems, I'll show you data, but I just try to get the big picture first. Extroversion seems to help at the beginning of social things. If you want to become a leader, extroversion helps. If you want to ask somebody out, extroversion helps. If you want to be noticed in class or be on a classroom team, extroversion helps. Helps to start those things, helps get hired for a job. So the beginnings are a problem for introversion. You got to kind of step it up right at the beginning of things. Extroversion also seems to help with breadth of relationships. People who are extroverted have bigger social networks. That's not so good for mental health necessarily. What you find for health is it's quality of relationships that count, not quantity. But breadth of relationships helps for getting a job. Some other things. So you know this person who knows this person, they might hook you up with something. So breadth matters. It's not the only thing in relationships. And introversion seems to help more with contemplation, to quietly think about things, which is, I think, part of what they're looking at a book like Quiet, is that if you're always busy talking, you can't sit down and really do depth-based, contemplative, that's a great word, contemplative work. And I looked at creativity because I thought this is a really interesting question. And the data seemed really mixed. In some cases, extroversion seemed to help. In science, for example, with some of the arts, writing, painting, introversion seemed to be related to more creativity. I think some of this is changing over time. Part of the reason could be science now. If you're doing science, it's really a team sport. You see much more, when you look at scientific projects, there's lots of people on them. When you look at novels, when you look at art, there's typically one person involved still. That might change, but it could be just the nature of those pursuits. So here are some examples. This is job searching. When I have somebody say, hey, I want to work with you, Dr. Campbell, and they're outgoing, I tend to give them an advantage. I shouldn't, because it doesn't predict, but I tend to. And this is what you find in the data. You find people who are extroverted lie more in interviews, which is a good strategy for getting hired. Please don't repeat that. They're more self-promoting in interviews, meaning they brag about themselves more, which can be good, as long as you're not too extreme. They're more successful in interviews, and they do more college activities, which helps. So they tend to be more involved. So just in terms of the job search, extroversion seems to help. That's what I was saying. It helps at the beginning of things. Then I thought, well, it must help in jobs, especially sales, because sales you need to be extroverted. So I looked at the data on this. I love this graph. None of you will be able to interpret this at all because it just looks like somebody scattered a bunch of paint on it. But I just love it because it's like a whisker plot. But basically, the study was really interesting. They actually looked at extroversion and amount of money people made in sales and found it really doesn't predict. People in the middle seem to do better than people at the low end or the high end.